Okay, well, hopefully everyone is arriving into the virtual room. I'm Becky Spate. I'm the CEO of the RSPB and I'm the chair for today's session, to which you are very, very welcome. I think it's going to be absolutely fascinating. And it's called Nature and the Green Recovery, Big Ideas for Where Nature-Based Solutions Can Go Next. And I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation and probably all learn a lot. Of course, we're here in a kind of virtual setting because we are in the midst of this pandemic, which we know is a zoonotic disease. And it's been an interesting time, hasn't it, during lockdown, which we're kind of starting to all emerge from now. And I think there's been a sense in which we've taken a huge interest and a huge solace as well from the natural world. And it's certainly, I think, acted to remind us all that we are very, very intimately connected with nature, although easy in our modern times to sometimes forget that. And of course, now all the talk is of what kind of recovery do we make into a new normal coming out of COVID, and much talk of the green recovery, particularly in response to the twin crises that we face into in terms of the climate and ecological crisis. And it's very evident that natural-based solutions, nature-based solutions, are solutions that speak to both those crises. So they do seem to, even on a very simple sense, make sense in terms of what we're facing into. And I think that combined with the impact of COVID is really making everyone wake up to their potential, even more so than prior to the crisis. We're not going to talk about trees much today. Trees got a really good airing, particularly during the last election, when there was a kind of arms race in terms of tree numbers that were going to be planted. And I think they're probably one of the more straightforward natural climate solutions, which means they have huge appeal. And what we wanted to do today was to try and kind of expand that agenda, if you like, for all of us, and really talk about all the different nature-based solutions that are available to us and how those work for us. And of course, we know we're kind of building up towards COP26 and the big global picture around what we're going to do for nature's recovery. There's a big commitment towards making nature a real feature of COP26, and nature-based solutions obviously would be key planks of any response that we make. So I think we need to have that kind of global picture in mind, as well as what's going on in the UK at the moment. At the RSPB, we've got quite a lot of experience in this area. We've done quite a lot of peatland restoration at places like Doveston. We've got coastal realignment work at Wallasea, and we've got kind of fingers in lots of pies, I suppose, in this area. But we've got lots of peers in the movement who are going to speak today, I think, about the experience they bring to bear as well. We've got 6 quick presentations. There'll be 3 land-based solutions to talk about and 3 marine-based. And then I'm very pleased to say that we're joined by Daniel Zeichner, the Shadow Minister for Agriculture, and Rebecca Pow, who is the Under Secretary of State at DEFRA, who are both going to respond, I think, to what they hear and share their own thoughts in this area. So that should be a really nice conclusion to the presentations. And then I'm hoping very much that we'll have time for some questions as well. I've got Adam somewhere in the ether who will kind of coordinate that for us and pass them to me. And we should be able to respond to some of those in the hour we've got as well. Just to say, we are recording, so if you're not happy about that, you should probably leave the virtual room now, and we'll be posting this discussion online afterwards. And just to say a huge thanks really to various people who have stepped in late in the day, Daniel being one of them, so thank you very much for that, Daniel. It's apologies for names that kind of weren't on the invitation when we originally sent that out. These things are always kind of slightly shifting sands. Okay, that's probably enough from me, so I will go over to our panelists. And the first person we're going to hear from is Vicki, who's the Head of Sustainable Farming at Sustain, and I think she's going to talk to us about orchards. So over to you, Vicki.
Thank you very much. Yes, you said we weren't talking about trees, and I got a bit of a shock, as did Barbara Young on the chat. I'm going to talk about trees, but very multifunctional trees. And agroforestry and orchards was my task, to show the big ideas that could come from those 2 approaches, which are getting a lot of interest, quite rightly. Talking about orchards first, which can obviously have many co-benefits in providing fruit and nuts, enterprise, incomes, jobs, public health and biodiversity, and traditional orchards particularly good for biodiversity, and they're where you have fruit and nut trees that are planted with a vigorous rootstock and planted low density, managed in low impact ways on permanent grassland. And all these co-benefits I mention, because by having co-benefits, really significant co-benefits, it's more likely for those approaches to be sustained and to be valuable for the wider community, and therefore to be sustained in general and rewarded and wanted. And in particular, we need to replace some of the fruit that we're actually importing. We import nearly 90% of our food. So more fruit orchards would be a good thing, and they can sequester a significant amount of carbon, storing in the tree and in the soil and maintaining it in the soil. But it's been largely overlooked. So looking at a few studies, and I'll do a blog because there's far too much to say here. One Italian study looked at net ecosystem and carbon productivity in orchards, and they have a net ecosystem carbon balance ranging from 0.6 to 6 tons of carbon per hectare, indicating the huge potential of these systems to store carbon. And that's both, as I said, above ground in the soil. And one study found that soils in the top 30 centimetres of a traditional orchards, and that's important, contain 74 tons of carbon per hectare compared to 26 to 34 in arable soils. And it included 21 tons per carbon per hectare in the trees and above ground alone. Organic production has been researched and been seen to have a far greater greenhouse gas emissions for the way in which organic orchards are managed. It decreased by 39% on average in a organic compared to a non-organic Spanish fruit trees orchards, to do with the sequestration in the soils and the cover cropping used and the incorporation of pruning residues and other management techniques. So the other thing about fruit trees, they can also produce large amounts of biomass, residual biomass in the form of pruning residues, which can be used for soil conditioning and animal feeding, and even for producing energy in a small scale. And cover crops below trees will protect the soil from erosion and contribute to soil carbon. So orchards as a whole, and particularly traditional orchards and along the spectrum, could be hugely significant, particularly as they could be grown in peri-urban and urban areas. And there's a lot of interest in that now, using land that isn't going to be stopping food growing elsewhere. Big potential there. We're looking into that, really exciting. Agroforestry is the next one, regenerative agroforestry. Lots of different types of agroforestry. It means, in hedgerows, in livestock systems, in arable systems, in mixed farming. And the aim is to incorporate woodland into the farming system rather than replacing cropping or livestock with trees. So it improves grass growth, it protects against flooding and topsoil erosion, increases farmland biodiversity massively, potentially if done well, and provides a source of livestock shelter, which can increase productivity. And if they're used for for biofuel or timber or for fruit and nuts, they can provide a farm income, which is very significant for many farms that I've spoken to. And there's a huge wealth of knowledge now growing about agroforestry here and globally. You just have to plug it in. One review of 53 published studies around the world showed that you can increase soil organic carbon using agroforestry by 34% compared to a cereal crop. And conversion from pasture or grassland to agroforestry can produce soil organic content increases of up to 10% on average. Now, obviously, there's lots of trade-offs. We have to be careful. Conversion of pasture, obviously, lots of things to think about there. And the potential soil impact when you do any conversion, particularly timber, trees, etc. You have to be very careful, and soil carbon is the important part of the picture. But overall, agroforestry and orchards have real potential to sequester carbon, maintain soils, protect soils, and deliver lots of co-benefits, which would mean that they are more likely to be retained, maintained, and provide a good economic and community benefit, which for the long term is a very important part of the picture. So I hope that sells agroforestry and orchards for you, Becky. Thank you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much, Vicki. And I should make clear that some of my best friends are trees.
Yes.
I can see I've already had my knees taken from under me by my previous chair. And there's probably nothing more beautiful than being in an orchard either, you know, either in springtime or when everything's starting to grow with fruit, which probably is at the moment. So that was really interesting. Thank you so much for that, Vicki. All right, we're going to move on now from trees to thinking about soils. And we've got Matt Williams, who's the Public Policy Officer at the National Trust, who is going to talk to us about peatland restoration. Matt.
Thanks, Becky. I'm just going to make sure that my screen starts sharing and you can see my slides, which hopefully you can do now. So thanks very much, everyone. I'm really excited to talk to you about the power of peat. And the UK's peatlands might not be a new solution, but they've certainly got a big contribution to make to the green recovery. They've been developing for the past 10,000 years. And our peatlands are made up in large part of the peat soil that is their foundation. But above the surface, they're incredible places for people to visit, homes to fantastic wildlife like the carnivorous sundew plant and the golden plover that was on my opening slide, to historic features and to spectacular landscapes. The UK has around 3 million hectares of peatland, which is 12% of the world total, but only 20% of these are in a healthy state. And it's because of their age that the UK's peatlands have a lot to give in terms of carbon. In fact, below the surface, they lock away the equivalent of 20 years worth of the UK's entire annual emissions. But this carbon is currently leaking into the atmosphere. We've put these carbon absorbing magic processes into reverse gear and turned them into effectively greenhouse gas factories that are pumping out into the atmosphere. The UK's peatlands currently release the equivalent of 6% of our annual emissions every year. And inaction on peatlands will lead only to the ongoing and accelerating decline of them and increased emissions. As the National Trust, we take care of a lot of peatland and we take our responsibility for that seriously. In places like the High Peak in this image and the Eastern Moors in Derbyshire with the RSPB, we've worked with partnerships like Moors for the Future to restore 33 kilometres squared of peatland since 2003, using techniques like blocking ditches and laying vegetation, restoring the species like the sphagnum moss. And healthy peatlands hold more water too, like big sponges, and there's growing scientific evidence that they can reduce the flood risk downstream for communities. The forthcoming England Peat Strategy has the potential to be game-changing for peatlands, and it's fantastic to see the government putting investment and policy momentum behind peatlands. I would ask the question of whether the discussion document that's out for survey at the moment is a missed opportunity. It doesn't set any hectare targets for peat restoration in the lowlands and the uplands. And what it does contain, unfortunately, isn't in line with the 25-year Environment Plan goal of all soils being sustainably managed by 2030. We also strongly welcome the government's clear intention to invest in our peatlands through the Nature for Climate Fund, but it is our understanding that most of that money will go to trees, and we need to see commensurate investment in our peatlands. The strategy is also an important opportunity to end the practices that are harming our peatlands and causing the destruction of peatlands overseas. We still use 2.1 million tonnes of peat compost every year. And the strategy is an opportunity to replace the failed voluntary targets on peat compost and to see it phased out entirely. At the National Trust, we love gardening and we've made all our gardens and plant centres as close to peat-free as possible. And we'd like to extend an invitation to the Minister and Shadow Minister to visit our peat-free garden centre at Morden Hall in London. We also look forward to the measures the government can introduce to end the burning practice as a management practice on peatlands, which the International Union for the Conservation of Nature has concluded wet, healthy peatlands simply don't need. That's predominantly about the uplands, but in the lowlands, in places like the Fens in Cambridgeshire and the Somerset Levels, peatlands are primarily used for productive agriculture, grazing, horticulture and arable crops. But some of these activities could be shifted to lower grade soils elsewhere, or made sustainable with support for farmers working in harmony with nature through the new agricultural system. In Europe, there's no end of wetland agriculture, or paludiculture as it's called, that allows economic production to continue on re-wetted healthy peatlands, such as producing reed for construction, sedge for animal fodder, or alder trees for furniture. So in conclusion, peatlands can be powerhouses for both externalised and internalised economic benefits. They provide significant carbon and water storage that new market mechanisms, such as the Peatland Code, a certification standard, are beginning to help land managers internalise and reap the benefits of. They can also be used, as I've explained, for productive agriculture when they're in a healthy state. And we at the National Trust have worked with Green Alliance to develop private markets for ecosystem services, such as those that peatlands deliver. Restored peatlands put money into the local economy too. At our Wick and Fen Nature Reserve, for example, that you can see in this image, visitor numbers have risen from 32,000 in 1999 to almost 70,000 in recent years, with people coming to enjoy the restored habitat, the beautiful walks and the wildlife right on the doorstep of Cambridge. And we've done this while significantly cutting the emissions from the peatland through its restoration. This is important as half of Cambridge's emissions come from its peat soils, so there's no way for the county to achieve net zero without restoring its peatlands. So to finish, beneath our feet, although perhaps not right at this second, peatlands are crucial parts of the UK's climate and nature ambitions and need to play a key role in any green recovery from the lockdown, but also any recovery from the nature and climate crises that we're facing.
Brilliant, Matt. That was a fantastic gallop from uplands to peat-free compost to burning to lowland peat as well. So really, really good kind of overview there of the issues in terms of peatland restoration and some challenges which I hope the Minister and the Shadow Minister might have views on as well in terms of how we tackle this going forward. Okay, so moving from peatland to a very different kind of landscape now, Honor Elridge is here, who is the policy lead from Plant Life and is going to talk to us, I think, about species-rich meadows. Honor.
Yes, I'm presenting on the climate value of species-rich grasslands this morning. So wildflower meadows and species-rich grasslands are the rainforests of the UK. They're home to species like buttercups, clovers and oxeye daisies. They're also home to threatened species like the iconic green-winged orchid. They're biodiversity hotspots that are home to, on average, 40 species of plants and fungi per square metre, which is a really remarkable figure. And these habitats support a myriad of other life, including small mammals, invertebrates and bird life, and provide a home and habitat for pollinators whose numbers are in severe decline. That said, 97% of our meadows and species-rich grasslands have been lost since the 1930s. A staggering 7.5 million acres have been ploughed up or agriculturally improved with synthetic fertiliser or built on for development. Of those remaining, 75% occur in exceptionally small fragments of less than 2 hectares, which limits the ability of wildlife to transverse across them, and cover less than 1% of the UK land. Yet 40% of UK land is pasture and semi-natural grassland, so there's a huge restoration potential there to bring this land back up to the same level as it should be. So Plant Life supports the need to restore our species-rich meadows because they're a key part of the climate solution. Grasslands provide a number of ecosystem services and public goods. As we've discussed previously, the untilled soils of meadows and grasslands provide a vital carbon sink and can sequester atmospheric carbon, locking it down into the soil. The absorbent soils of floodplain meadows capture and hold back water, providing a natural flood defence, which is increasingly important at a time when extreme weather events are happening with more frequency. The nutritional benefit to livestock is also substantial, given that species-rich grassland provide a wider range of minerals and amino acids to livestock. And grazing on species-rich grassland reduces the need for antibiotics, which is a key concern given the rise of resistance. Surviving ancient meadows are irreplaceable, and they're a key part of the UK's cultural heritage. And access to these meadows provide the public with mental and physical health benefits and a sense of well-being, which is increasingly important at a time of COVID. So we're asking to see the restoration of 120,000 hectares of species-rich grasslands across the UK. We believe that the Environmental Land Management Scheme, as outlined in the Agriculture Bill, can provide the support for the restoration and maintenance of species-rich grasslands and wildflower meadows. But there's also the need for increasing protection, legal protection for these meadows in order to protect the ones that remain. And there needs to be wider recognition across government of grassland restoration as a climate solution. So we believe that grassland-based solutions need to be placed at the heart of the post-COVID green recovery. Plant Life has identified 6 different species-rich grassland restoration projects that are shovel-ready already across the UK. And implementing these projects would cost approximately £7.6 million and would provide 36 full-time jobs. So we would ask for the recognition and increased support for species-rich grassland as a nature-based solution in the post-COVID recovery. Thanks.
Great, thank you. I think that's often a nature-based solution that does get overlooked, actually. And you know, meadows, we've lost so many of them over the recent kind of period of time. It's just kind of about really trying to kind of galvanise and bring back that particular species-rich grassland covering, I think, for all it can do for us. So thanks for that, Honor. Thank you. Okay, right, we're moving on from land to sea now, marine. So we've got some solutions that are marine based. So we've got Chris Thorne, who's an oceans campaigner at Greenpeace, and is going to talk to us, I think, particularly about deep sea carbon. Chris.
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to talk about deep sea carbon and MPAs. So first of all, just wanted to make it clear that the Greenpeace view is that nature-based solutions should primarily be pursued to improve biodiversity, but the biodiversity boost can then be beneficial for climate too. So marine protected areas, or MPAs for short, are a fantastic tool to do this, requiring minimal government action, as the ocean can prosper simply by being left alone. MPAs place areas of the ocean off limits to some or all human activity in order to maintain or restore the condition certain protected features. And the science is overwhelmingly clear that fully or highly protected MPAs, free of disruptive human activities, have better ecological outcomes than those which aren't properly protected. These areas act as a sanctuary for marine life, giving it space from human pressures to successfully breed, feed and grow. So fully or highly protected MPAs result in greater biodiversity. Strong biodiversity has an overspill effect to the surrounding waters, leading to greater catches for fishers, benefiting coastal communities and their local economies. Strong biodiversity is also vital for ecosystem processes to function effectively, including the biological processes that safely capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it as carbon. The ocean is an integral part of the Earth's carbon cycle. The deep ocean is the world's largest carbon sink, storing more than 50 times the amount of carbon in the atmosphere and more than 10 times the amount of carbon held in terrestrial vegetation, soils and microbes combined. This can happen in coastal ecosystems like kelp beds, seagrass meadows and salt marsh, which I think you're going to hear about from the upcoming speakers. And it can also, these processes also take place within the open ocean. So surface algae capture carbon via photosynthesis, it enters marine food web, some of which is cycled right down into the deep ocean, eventually settling in the seabed in fecal matter or in the bodies of dead organisms. And without this process, present day carbon dioxide concentrations would be approximately 50% higher. So abundant marine life and thriving ecosystems increase the potential of these biological processes to help combat climate change. So the best way to safeguard the health of the ocean and improve biodiversity and benefit local fishers while helping mitigate climate change is through a network of fully or highly protected MPAs off limits to disruptive human activity. So you could say that ocean protection is climate action. The UK has a network of MPAs covering 25% of coastal waters, but very few activities are restricted within them. So stronger management measures must be enforced to get the full benefit of these MPAs. Evidence shows that the existing UK MPAs with no-take zones, where fishing is outlawed, are successful. So a recent report on the Saltmarshes Bay no-take zone shows a substantial increase in biodiversity since it was established in 2008, with some species increasing in abundance by up to 400%. But only 4 of our MPAs have zones like this, so the government needs to make an urgent start on upgrading the network. The first step towards properly protecting our MPAs would be a ban on super trawlers. These are gigantic fishing vessels over 100 metres long, capable of catching and processing hundreds of tons of fish a day. These are boats emblematic of disruptive industrial fishing, which we exposed as collectively fishing for thousands of hours in 39 UK MPAs last year. This must immediately stop. Once super trawlers are banned, the government should work towards making MPAs fully or highly protected, as per Richard Benyon's HBMA review, to cover 30% of our waters by 2030. This would benefit marine biodiversity and boost the local fishing industry. So would reallocation of fishing quota based on social, environmental and local economic criteria, ensuring that fishing is more sustainable in the long term and brings even greater benefits to coastal communities. So combined, properly protected MPAs and quota reform can kickstart the green and blue recovery that we so desperately need while tackling the nature crisis and climate breakdown too. Thank you.
Great. I love that MPAs and quota kind of approach, and the combination of kind of green and blue at the end there as well. That was really, really powerful. And I think it's interesting the minute you start talking about oceans and marine, you're into kind of a very much a global picture. So that was really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Right. Next up, we have Alec Taylor, who's Head of Marine Policy at WWF, and is going to talk to us about the mysterious seagrass and kelp forests, I think. Alec.
Yes, thank you, Becky. It's a pleasure to follow Chris, and I completely agree with everything that he said there about the blue recovery and the green recovery working together for climate and nature. I'm head of the ocean team at WWF. I'm going to be talking to you about our blue forests. So a lot of talk about trees on land, rightly so, as part of the climate solution, but it may surprise you that we have twice as much forest cover at sea than we do on land, in the form of kelp forests, seagrass meadows, merle beds, seaweed, that sort of thing. So, and actually, as well as being beautiful three-dimensional ecosystems for nature, they are also much faster at capturing carbon than terrestrial ecosystems, and they have the potential to store carbon for much longer periods of time if they're properly protected and not disturbed. I'm going to touch on seagrass and kelp as two of those case studies. This photo is from a project that we're working with Sky on in terms of restoring seagrass in Wales. And first thing to say is that these are both ocean superheroes when it comes to climate change. To take seagrass as an example, seagrass globally covers 1/5 of 1% of the ocean floor, but it captures and buries over 10% of all the organic carbon that's captured and stored by the ocean each year. That happens up to 35 times faster than tropical rainforests. As well as the carbon benefits, each rugby pitch of seagrass potentially holds up to 80,000 fish and 100 million invertebrate species. And that's a real kind of mosaic of life that's actually key to coastal communities in terms of supporting their regeneration, the recovery of fish stocks locally, as well as water quality and storm prevention benefits. On the downside, we're still losing our seagrass at a rate of about 7% globally each year, and we've lost at least half, if not up to 90% of our seagrass in the UK over the last 100 years. In terms of kelp fix themselves to rocky outcrops, so they're not like seagrass, which prefers shallow, clean, sandy beds. But kelp are actually one of the fastest growing plants alive at the moment today. They grow up to 2 feet per day, at least 20 to 30 times faster than land plants, and they capture carbon immediately from day one. And another great thing about kelp is that they are really good at transferring carbon from where they are to the deeper ecosystem. So they're really good at moving carbon around as well as capturing it through dying off and regrowing each year and breaking off through wave action. It's thought globally that kelp capture between 200 and 600 million tons of carbon each year. And even at the lower end of that spectrum, that would be greater than the current emissions of New York. And at the higher end of that spectrum, that would be more than the UK's total emissions last year. So there's a real potential if we can actually not just protect what we've got left and avoid further decline, but actually start to properly restore some of these kelp and seagrass ecosystems to really make a sizable difference to helping to mitigate, and also critically to adapt to climate change, because coastal communities are really going to be on the front line in the UK of some of these changes that are coming down the line. And WWF's Global Futures report earlier this year reported that actually the annual economic loss from not protecting our coastal ecosystems like seagrass would be in the region of £15 billion a year by 2050 if we don't start protecting and restoring them now. So just to conclude, restoring ocean nature-based solutions like these blue forests is really, I would suggest, a no regrets strategy for the government. It has all these co-benefits, as Vicki and others have said. This is not just about carbon, it's about supporting economies, it's about supporting fisheries, livelihoods. The benefits, the economic benefits from protection at the moment are much greater than restoration. So let's not jump into the restoration agenda without actually having properly protected what we've got at the moment. And as Chris said, allowing natural ecosystems the time and space to recover. And actually, wouldn't it be great to have, as part of a COP26 leadership programme for the UK, a scaled up integrated blue carbon recovery programme, which brings together kelp forests, seagrass beds, salt marshes, other ocean nature-based solutions like marine protected areas. And actually, you know, that could be a real world-leading bit of policy that shows the UK is actually walking the walk as far as this. So that's why I've got a little blue road to Glasgow icon down there for my COP26 leadership. And I'm willing to sell those as badges as to anybody who wants them. And very finally, I just wanted to take this opportunity to have a shout out to the wonderful Help Your Kelp campaign down in Sussex. And this could be a real action that the government could take today if it wanted to. The fisheries regulator down in Sussex, along with some visionary stakeholders, have taken the opportunity to approve a fisheries restriction of 300 square kilometres to protect and recover the kelp forests down in Sussex. And that has been signed off locally, but as we understand it, it's still sitting on the Secretary of State's desk for sign-off at the moment. So it would be great if maybe not as a direct commitment today, but if the Minister could go away and have a word with the Secretary of State to sign off that bylaw down in Sussex. That'd be a real first step, because that's really the kind of thing that we need going forward. And with that, I'll hand over back to Vicki. Thank you.
Good ask, Alec, and thank you for taking us back into that kind of global arena again, and the COP26 kind of target, and also talking to us about how kelp can move carbon around, which I was really interested in. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, right. Finally, we've got RSPB's Rhiannon Niven, who's Senior Water Policy Officer for us, and is going to talk about coastal realignment and salt marsh. Rhiannon.
Yep, so hi everyone, it was good to follow off on Alec, who's obviously just talked to us about some of the blue carbon within the sea, where I'm going to talk about the UK's estuaries and coasts and how they're incredibly valuable places to live, work, relax and play, and for all of the wealth of wildlife they support. So as we may or may not know, our coastlines help protect us from flooding, they support our fisheries, and they attract millions of visitors. And I bet a few of you, including myself, have made it out to your local beach at the end of lockdown. And in fact, it's estimated that the value of our services provided by our coastal habitats is approximately £48 billion. But our coastal zone is in trouble. So the UK is currently projected to lose at least 60 hectares of protected intertidal habitat per year due to coastal squeeze and increased coastal erosion. So back in 2018, the RSPB completed our Sustainable Shores project and found that since World War II, we have lost over 15% of our salt marsh, 18% of our sand dunes, and 46% of our shingle habitat. These losses are largely from coastal development and land reclamation. Worryingly, without action, we predict we're going to lose a further 3,000 hectares by 2050 due to climate change and sea level rise. So this loss is obviously keenly felt by nature and people, as the UK salt marshes are really important feeding grounds and breeding, nesting places and refuge sites for many of our red and amber listed bird species. For example, approximately 50% of the British redshank population use salt marsh as a breeding habitat. But these coastal habitats, so our seagrass meadows, as Alec mentioned, the salt marshes and mudflats are also really important landscapes that we can use as a nature-based solution to lock in huge amounts of carbon. So coastal blue carbon ecosystems can sequester up to 2 to 4 times more carbon than terrestrial forests based on their area. So our coast has the potential to help us adapt to climate change and help store our carbon emissions if we accelerate and invest in protection and restoration of coastal ecosystems. So managed realignment on the coast is a nature-based solution where traditional sea defences are removed and set back, and the salt marsh is returned to restore the habitat and manage the coastal flood risk. So the RSPB has delivered and managed many of the coastal management realignment schemes across the UK, and with a big focus in England. So working with our partners, we've delivered and managed more than a third of the coastal habitat created in the UK. So around 880 hectares to date, and we want to do more. So the largest managed realignment of the open coast undertaken in the UK was completed in September 2013. So now our RSPB Medbury Reserve, which is, I've got some facts for you up on the screen. So this included the creation of about 200 hectares of wetland habitat, and it currently protects about 348 properties and the associated infrastructure from coastal flooding. This was a huge project, and the scheme was funded by the Environment Agency in partnership with the RSPB and obviously many others, and has formed this new intertidal habitat which will provide food and shelter for species, reduces flood risk, and captures carbon. So another really great example, and one of RSPB's kind of another flagship reserve, is the Wallasea Island. So this managed realignment scheme here was supported by many people and involved DEFRA, the Environment Agency, Natural England, Crossrail, and the RSPB all working together and with the community, and has seen the creation of approximately 670 hectares of intertidal habitat, saline lagoons, and coastal grassland. So this new area supports a wide range of species, including nationally and internationally protected bird populations, and has significantly increased the carbon sequestration capacity on the reserve. So managed realignment schemes must be considered as part of the green recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, driving recovery that works for nature and people. In England, this would also really help us deliver targets under the 25-year Environment Plan, the new Environment Agency's 2025 Action Plan, and deliver the brand new flood and coastal erosion strategy released by the Environment Agency earlier this week. So we've already identified 26,500 hectares where we could help make this happen across England by using our sustainable shores and carbon mapping research. So to build on this, we propose a brand new national coastal habitat creation program, which will unlock innovative partnerships between local communities, government, private investors, and NGOs to help shape large-scale, transformative, nature-based solutions and deliver jobs, deliver and achieve a resilient economy, healthy communities, and a thriving natural world. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Rhiannon. Thank you for that. And you kind of pulled us back into the kind of domestic agenda there, and it's interesting how much this conversation has played over both the domestic and the global agenda, I think. Now, I'm going to turn now to Daniel, first of all, for our response, and then to Rebecca. And I'm going to be fierce and hold you both just to 5 minutes so that we have got time for a few questions at the end. So if people have questions, just put them in the chat bar or the Q&A, and we will try and come to those. But I'm going to turn to you first, Daniel, please, for a response to what you've heard.
Well, thank you very much, and what tremendous presentations. I suspect you're going to see a fair amount of agreement from myself and Rebecca, in the sense that we're going to be very keen on lots of this. The question is, can one translate it into action? And my first thought would be, I'm very privileged to represent Cambridge, which of course has the fantastic David Attenborough building with many organisations based there. And I was very struck last year by a contribution from a colleague from the UN Environment Programme World Conservation Monitoring Centre, who told me that out of 337 common interventions they'd assessed, only a third were evidence-based. Now, when if you're trying to choose between any of these pitches, it's the evidence that's going to count. Now, I suspect that actually there is a lot of evidence behind these, but I was struck by that in general. I think it's something we need to bear in mind. You started by saying, or referring to the arms race on trees in the election. I'm not keen on arms races in general. As the party that obviously had the biggest bucks in terms of trees have been by 2030, we didn't win the election. And so it doesn't really matter how many you're promising, it's how many you can deliver. And without being party political about it, I think the problem at the moment is we're not keeping up with anybody's targets. So the key is how you can actually make things happen and deliver them. And obviously, Vicki, what you were describing very, very much with the grain of the arguments that I was putting on in the agriculture bill on behalf of the Labour Party. I'm afraid many of our amendments did fall on deaf ears, but I'm very impressed by the Our Future in the Land report last year. And I think it's widespread agreement that we want to grow far more fruit, vegetables in our country. There's some challenges, of course, around labour issues and so on, which are not necessarily part of the environmental picture, but I think do have to be addressed. But I think I very much find myself in agreement with you on. And on the peat burning question, well, obviously I'll leave that to the Minister to explain we are still where we are on that. But the power and the peat, absolutely, I don't think there's much disagreement on the good that could be done through that. And Matt, I certainly happily take up your invitation to come to Morden Hall when we're allowed to do that kind of thing. On species meadows, again, I think it's getting into a debate that's been had around the agricultural issues, obviously very salient at the moment with the agriculture bill in the House of Lords. I think the argument you make is a strong one, and it very much depends how the environmental management schemes are actually going to pan out, whether we can actually use them in the way which I'm entirely sure they are intended, but there's a lot of detail to be resolved. But that is one way in which one might hope that some of that could be achieved. Switching quickly to oceans, which far too often, I think, in the wider public debate, get missed out. I was actually very proud of Labour's plans going into the election. I think because it was an election in December and people didn't perhaps have much time, a lot of the detail wasn't looked at. But Labour's plan for nature is well worth looking back at, work that Sue Hayman and others did. And if you look in there, there's strong promises on oceans, on MPAs, and again, I think entirely with you on that. And on the seagrass. I love the Blue Carbon Recovery Programme. I'm not entirely sure of the Blue Road to Glasgow. I think personally I've gone for a railway line, but we can do about that another day. But absolutely should be leading to COP26, and of course to COP15 in the meantime. And on Rhiannon's points on coastal habitats, it does seem to me that this does rather depend on a country having a clear land policy, and I'm not sure that is exactly where we're at the moment. And I think if we could get some changes on that, that would help. Obviously, hugely ambitious piece of work that you're doing. And again, I find myself wondering whether some of the money currently spent on agricultural support, if we get those tier 3 schemes, which I'm sure Rebecca might want to talk a bit more about, a bit more clarity on some of them, it ought to be possible to do some quite major pieces of work. That's certainly where the Labour Party would be looking to go. Conscious I'm running up against my 5 minutes, Becky, but I'll just finish, I suppose, with 2 observations. Lots of optimism through all of this. Well, I say, I think, without being a downer, I do think there are a lot of threats at the moment as well. I worry about our transition out of the EU, because I think our environmental protection is very strong at the moment. I'm not convinced we'll have the EPOs in place in time by the end of the year. But even more than that, I worry to drift away from the precautionary principle in general. I think we need a strong restatement of that basic principle of where we stand in terms of protecting our environment. Because if we are starting to drift towards systems of regulation and protection that are prevalent in some other parts of the world, then I think we're backwards, and I want to go forwards. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Daniel. I'm now going to pass on to Rebecca to respond. Rebecca, I think you are in the hot seat. It is about making it happen. And I think, whilst we welcome the kind of narrative around the Environment Agency announcements this week, it didn't feel like enough in terms of really making progress on nature-based solutions. So we'd love to hear from you on that, and on some of the asks from the panelists around action around perhaps peat, and some of the kind of global aims for COP26. So a lot to cover, but I'll give you your 5 minutes. Oh, you're on mute, Rebecca. Just come off.
Sorry, Becky.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, put your hands up if you can hear me. Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously, I'm very of that utmost crucial situation is that we, in talking about climate change, we also talk about nature, biodiversity, and how nature-based solutions can help to mitigate climate change and help us adapt to it. And so that's why today's event is really great, and to hear these different views and all the research going on is genuinely very, very helpful. Obviously, the government is completely committed to this, which you'll know we've got our Nature for Climate Fund, £640 million, and we've just recently launched this Green Challenge Fund, which many environmental stakeholders worked very closely with us on, and I do hope that some of these big ideas that you've all got here will be submitted to get some of that money to put some of these projects into operation. And lots of them, as being referred to, are actually shovel ready, and at the same time as helping, they will create jobs in our green recovery. So I think that's very positive. And of course, many people have referred to COP26. We've now got this nature element as a key to that, so we can build on lots of these ideas that we're talking about today and highlight them at that very top level event. I'm going to touch on some of the individual presentations because they were clearly really interesting, and obviously areas that people have been doing a great deal of work about, whether it's wetlands, coastal, marine ecosystems, salt marshes, seabeds. I mean, such a wide range of opportunities there. So first of all, agroforestry, and there are huge opportunities here for agroforestry to help deliver all the trees that we're committed to delivering, the 30,000 hectares of trees a year, but also to deliver through elms some of the extra things that we can deliver there. And I was genuinely interested in Vicki's talk about orchards. I'm a huge fan of orchards. The fruit and nut element, what I would ask is, we need evidence and data about, who's going to pick this fruit, where is it going to be used. The biomass element is really interesting because biomass is potentially an area where we need to do more work. Could we use the biomass for energy plants? If so, what's the modelling? How do you get it off the farms and into the energy plants, which I would say would have to be local? Really interesting data on the soils there. I'm a huge soil fan, as you know, about how much carbon is stored in that top 30%. Then I was going to touch on Matt and his peat. Obviously, we have launched our peat strategy, as you said, and I hope you're feeding into that. Well, the paper that's out at the moment, please input into that. And you make obviously some good points about peat, but we've got the message about why peat restoration is so important, and a large element of that Nature for Climate Fund will go to peat restoration, which we're slightly critical about, but I will make sure that happens. And the lowland aspects you talked about are very important. The opportunities to also restore our lowland peat. And we've got our Lowland Peat Task Force, of course, working on options. I was very interested in your ideas about wetter lowlands, potentially producing other crops, the older trees, the sedge and the reed. But obviously you need markets for them. It would need to be viable to get farmers actually to commit to going into those schemes. But very interesting. Honor, you touched on something dear to my heart, species-rich grasslands. You called it our rainforest. I also call, of course, ancient woodland our equivalent to the rainforest. Get that in there for you, Becky. And there are opportunities, of course, through elms to increase, to either restore current wildflower meadows, many of which, of course, are in triple SIs, many of which actually need to be brought into better condition, but there are opportunities there, and equally there are opportunities to create more meadows, more diversity of species, even pollinator strips, and we've got our pollinator strategy building on that through elms. Potentially tier 1 could help here. It's Bees Knees week, by the way, this week, so I've been doing a lot on bees. Now, Chris Thorne, you talked about deep sea carbon, really interesting, and you touched on high marine protection areas, which of course we've had Richard Benyon's report into us. We will be responding to that in due course, but it of course raises many of the issues you're raising about no-take zones, and we're looking at it very closely. Leaving the EU, this is the opportunity. Our Labour colleagues are still bemoaning the fact that we're leaving the EU, but that gives us the opportunity to stop these super trawlers coming into our water. You're absolutely right about that. We've got the fisheries bill with that sustainable fishing element, And also we've got this new power in the fishing bill to enable the Marine Management Organisation to make its own bylaws to protect our marine protection areas from damaging fishing activities. And I hope that you welcome that, and we need to build on that. I think that's positive. And then touching on Alex with his Sky presentation about the seagrass and the kelp forest, really everything you say about the value of these kelp forests is right. And I think if we could do some kind of presentation about this at the COP26, broadening everything out to the marine space, I think that would be worthwhile. Please feed in those ideas. And then touching on Saltmarsh, of course, I had the pleasure of going to Wallasea Island, to that nature reserve, which is an unbelievable project which demonstrates just what you can do in many ways, actually, because it demonstrates how you can work in partnership, which I think we're going to have to do more and more of, whether it's getting money from our new schemes, from ELMS, money from the Nature Climate Fund, but then also attracting in business investment with carbon offsetting, biodiversity net gain, which is coming through the environment plan. I think there were enormous opportunities there to increase our salt marshes, exactly what you are describing. I went to also Steert in Somerset near me, a fantastic project where they introduced climate resilience with this sort of managed retreat method. They've sequestered carbon and wonderful bird life, but also wonderful salt marsh lamb. So lots and lots of wins there, and I think lots of opportunities to build on that, maybe through the tier 3 of the ELM as well, much bigger scale projects. So there's so much I could say. I think there's so much opportunity. I do urge you all to keep feeding into us, apply to that Green Challenge Fund, please. And I think it's a very exciting moment in time, but we do need to get it right. It is serious, it is challenging, but you know, I'm here as your Environment Minister, and I'm determined that we will address these things.
That's really good to hear, Rebecca. Thank you. I think there's a real sense in which the urgency of the kind of twin crisis means we have to kind of just move on this stuff faster and at bigger scale. So it's great to know that you're kind of pushing that agenda on our behalves. I just want to take a couple of questions, if I can. Adam, you've been corralling them, I hope.
Hi. Yeah, I had a few questions in advance on a similar topic. So about the presentations in the webinar primarily being on natural landscapes and semi-natural habitats. So what role do the speakers think that urban nature-based solutions can play? And then connected to that, with regard to the nature-based solutions that are in kind of far off wild places, how do we make these relevant to the majority of the UK population that live in urban centres?
Great, thank you, Adam. So this is about playing into the urban agenda. I'm just see if I can see everybody to see if anyone particularly wants to answer that.
Well, I'll say a bit if you like.
Yeah.
Just very quickly, I could talk about all sorts of things, but actually we did launch our flood policy statement this week, which had a much more holistic approach to dealing with flood resilience in its widest sense. And that does involve a whole lot of projects like more sustainable urban drainage, more areas where you could, in time of floods in your town. I've seen a very good example of this in Manchester, actually, where they've got a huge green area, but it can take water in time of flood from the river if the river overflows. But at the rest of the time when it drains away, it's a wonderful nature area. It's a great place for people to walk and enjoy themselves. And it's like multi-beneficial, and it's really working. And in our new plans, we're trying to actually link up with other bodies, whether it's water companies, whether it's ENGOs, whether it's and some government funding, in order to increase these kind of projects, which actually are right in our urban centres. So I think there's a lot to build on there and a lot of opportunity.
Okay, anyone else want to just come in on that? Yes, Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Becky. So I suppose there's a few areas where this connects. Trees in towns and cities play an extremely important role, not just in terms of locking up carbon, but the ONS estimated that in 2017 they provided £248 million worth of cooling and shading benefits. And floods, as Rebecca says, is an extremely important point as well. And it was great to see that in that flooding money, there was £960,000 for peat restoration in the peak districts. And whilst that's in the countryside, as I said in my presentation, that can benefit towns and cities downstream by reducing the flood risk. And finally, at the global level, by 2030, I think around 70% of the world's population is going to be urban. And in cities and megacities, we need to buffer those places against the impacts of extreme climate events. And nature-based solutions like mangrove forests can help us to do that. But in the UK as well, we at the National Trust know that some of the biggest threats from climate change are coastal erosion, which affect not just our properties, but also communities as well. And restoring salt marsh and allowing land to be reclaimed by the sea can in some cases actually provide a natural defence that makes communities safer from those impacts of climate change.
Okay, great. I'm sure there's lots more to say, but I'm going to move on to another question or a set of questions. Adam.
Yeah, just a couple other quick questions I've got in advance. So one is, how can we create jobs in nature-based solutions and nature restorations, especially for young people? And kind of scaling that up within the context of the green recovery. And then secondly, I mean, I guess it's quite a broad one, but the presentations are focused primarily on the opportunities for nature-based solutions. But what do some of the speakers think are the primary barriers to their rollout?
Okay, jobs first of all. Anyone want to come in on this one?
Well, I'll speak again.
Oh,
you like?
Vicki, hang on, I've got Vicki. Vicki, come in.
Well, I think, you know, both of the Rebecca and Daniel pointed out the jobs issue with regard to agroforestry and orchards in particular, and we are seeing it as a real opportunity to develop enterprise and opportunities and skills development in peri-urban and urban areas, but it remains an issue whether people want to work in that kind of thing. But one of the issues that we failed to mention, actually, all of us, was that obviously the potential for farming to be a nature-based solution to lock in carbon, and agroecological, probably because there isn't time, we only have an hour, that obviously organic systems are you know, potential to employ people in a really positive way to deliver high carbon producing systems. So there's potential there, but we're really excited about what we could do in urban areas, and we'd like to get an orchard in every borough.
Sounds exciting. Daniel, I'm going to come to you. Yeah.
Thanks, Becky. I mean, it hardly be a surprise to you to know that this is the key as far as we're concerned. And Niven's suggestion a few weeks ago of creating an army of young people working on the kind of projects, I think it's the kind of scale that's needed. And there are real opportunities. And I think in a lot of urban areas, there's real enthusiasm and possibility. We're going to have to reimagine how some of our urban areas are going to work anyway, because of the change we're seeing because of the COVID crisis. So put all that together, and there is a real opportunity. It will need intervention and it will need leadership.
Thanks. And there's a really exciting proposal in at the moment for a kind of a nature solutions based workforce. So we're really hoping the government's going to listen to that kind of combined approach from the sector. I'm going to come on to barriers now. So what are the barriers? Why aren't we doing this? It's so obvious. So why aren't we doing more of it? Alec.
Yeah, thank you, Becky. I suppose two initial barriers from my side are effective governance and regulation, and then also finance. And great to see Rebecca and others talk about some of the financial elements that are coming forward. I think one of the opportunities of this agenda is to really leverage up both public and private sector finance. One of the amazing things from our Seagrass work is how interested the financial sector, the corporate sector, the business sector are in nature-based solutions, and showing them some returns on their investment as well. So I think if we can all work together, we can really scale up something to be more than the sum of its parts. And on the effective governance and regulation, I mean, you know, effective management of marine protected areas would be one thing, obviously, but it would be great if spatial planning systems on land and at sea could look 20 years into the future and identify and safeguard now the areas which could be suitable for the kind of restoration that we'll need in order to tackle this climate crisis. And I think, you know, a really progressive set of spatial planning systems could be great for actually building this into the long term.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. That kind of idea of blended finance, kind of the importance of spatial planning and really being kind of future facing in terms of that. And then kind of, I think, you know, just some really bold steps in terms of appropriate kind of regulation to really make some of this possible would be great. Chris.
Yeah, just on the barriers, I think for establishing fully protected MPAs at local level, barriers can be the fishing industry. They don't like the sound of an area where they can't fish, but the evidence is really clear that these areas lead to bigger fish, more fish, and bigger catches in all the surrounding areas. And some of our most, a handful of successful no-take zones, there was great opposition to them. So Lundy Island and Lamlash Bay that I mentioned in my presentation, there's great local opposition. Now they've seen the benefits, they love them. So that's one barrier. Then on a national level, as the Minister said, I think whatever your view of Brexit, it is going to present a new opportunity for regulation of marine protected areas, as under the Common Fisheries Policy, it's been very difficult to introduce measures to restrict fishing activity in parts of national waters. So there's an opportunity there, and we really welcome concrete commitments from the government to seize that opportunity and properly protect MPAs. And then internationally, what's stopping the establishment of a global network of marine protected areas is the kind of lack of governance mechanism on the high seas, but work at the UN through the Global Ocean Treaty is ongoing to establish a mechanism that would allow the establishment of marine protected areas all across the world. So we need to see the government kind of really take a leadership role in those negotiations.
Great, thank you, Chris. Okay, we're kind of out of time. I'm really sorry. We could probably talk for a long time around these areas. I think a sense in which, you know, this is absolutely part of the UK's domestic agenda, but also that kind of global agenda, particularly with the COP26 opportunity we've got. We know what we need to do. You know, you talked about evidence, Daniel. I think the evidence is very much there. So it is just about how we can kind of ramp this up now, do a lot more of it, do it faster, because the urgency of our times is upon us, and there are so many benefits to be had from taking these kinds of approaches. So it's been really fascinating. I've loved listening to you all. Thank you so much, Rebecca and Daniel, for coming in and joining us and giving us your views. And thank you very much to our panel of speakers, who were truly excellent. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for listening and joining in. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.